In part 2 of the Blender Fast Track series, we're going to build out our sword. If you are new to Blender, there'll be a link in the description to part 1 of the series, which is designed for a complete beginner. In part 2, we're going to get up to speed with the basics of polygon modeling. Then we will go step by step on how to build out our sword asset. We'll go through the basics of UVs, learn the basics of textures, and shader nodes. For me, 3D modeling was a real struggle when I first started, which is why we at cgfasttrack.com are super passionate about really simplifying the process and building the courses that we wish we had when we first started. If you would like to get to know my experience, there'll be a link in the description to my demo reel. And with that said, let's get going. Here's where we're headed. We're going to start modeling out this gear, and this is going to be a nice warm up before we get to our sword object. In part 1, we avoided hotkeys to make it easier to get up and running with Blender. Now we're getting to more intermediate levels, and we want to start implementing these, and this is going to start speeding up our workflow drastically. We already went over the viewport navigation, so you should be comfortable at this point with that one. The stuff that we're going to go over right now is going to be the move, rotate, and scale. So what are those? So we have G, R, and S right here. This is going to be what we have over here, right? It's just a little bit different. So G to move. So you notice as soon as you hit G, we can move it around and then we can drop it with another click. So G will attach it to your cursor and then click to drop, just like that. So it's a 3-step process. G, move it around, click to drop. And then we have the same thing, R for rotation, click to drop, and then S for scale, click the drop. Now, you notice that it's really hard to move it on a specific axis. Now, I'm going to show you guys the standard way first. Personally, I don't use it this way, and I'll explain that in a bit, but I'm going to show you guys the standard way first. The standard way is to do these snapping tools right here. And basically what this is whenever you hit G, we can now activate a snapping mode, which is X, Y, or Z, which is going to be snapping it to a specific coordinate axis. Now, for me, this isn't an easy thing to do. My brain doesn't really like to do this. I encourage you to practice this. Another option that we have here is using middle mouse button. So we have G, and then we can do middle mouse button and hold to snap it to a specific axis as well. And this is going to be consistent with rotation as well, like this. Scaling as well. Middle mouse button, or we can use the XYZ snap. Now, the way I like to do is with the Lazy Viewport add-on, which is a custom add-on we built at CG Fast Track. There will be a link down in the description for this as well. It's just github.com/cgfasttrack/lazy viewport. And then what we do is we just go to code, and then we just do download a zip file like that. And then from here, wherever you have your downloads, you just right click it, and then you just do extract all. I'm just going to go ahead and extract that. And then we dive inside of that folder, and there'll be this lazyviewport.py. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that path. I'm going to go back to Blender and go to Edit and then Preferences. So we haven't jumped in here, but we'll be touching up on this as we go. We'll go down to the Add-ons tab right here, and we'll just go to Install right up here. And then we'll go ahead and navigate to our lazyviewport.py, and then we'll just do Install Add-on. So an add-on is just a plugin for Blender. It's a very common. There's a ton of free ones out there. This one's free as well. We'll need to search for our Lazy Viewport right here, and then just go to click on Enable right here. Now, what does that do? Why do I like to use that? Basically now our G, R, and S right here, these hotkeys right now work with our viewport tools that we've been using over here. So G to move, R to rotate, S to scale. Very simple. Now, this is a personal preference. I like to use this just because it keeps both my mouse and my hand busy, whereas the other way is kind of keyboard heavy. So I can essentially do 2 operations at once. And this way as well, I don't have to necessarily remember which coordinate I need just to rotate around, right? It's much more visual. Again, that's a personal preference. I definitely encourage you to play around with the snapping mode versus Lazy Viewport, see what works well for you. The next 3 hotkeys we want to get to know down here are just going to be frame selected. So this one is another standard one that I don't use much, and this is number pad period, and that's just going to be to zoom in like this. The reason why I don't use this as well is because, again, we have to take our hand off the keyboard just to hit zoom in on something, and we're going to be using this one a lot, right? So the way I like to do this, I use the tilde key. We're not going to introduce that yet, just to keep it simple. A simple way to utilize this is to go to View and then Frame Selected. And then what we can do here is just right click and then Add to Quick Favorites. So I'll right click, Add to Quick Favorites right there. And then what we have here is now our quick favorites, which is right here as Q. And that's going to open up a menu, and then we just click that. So we can just do Q, click, and it's going to frame selected. So now we don't have to take our hand off the mouse, as we're going to be really, really fast. It'll be an easy way for us to get up to speed with moving around very, very quickly while we're modeling. And then the last thing we want to get to know is just X. So we just select this, and if we want to delete it, we just hit X. Now, before you move on to the next chapter, you want to practice each one of these hotkeys. Really make sure that you're comfortable with all of these viewport tool hotkeys before moving on. Just go through each one, download the hotkey cheat sheet, practice with it a few times, maybe try making the Minecraft scene again with these hotkeys. And with that said, in the next chapter, we're going to start taking a look at edit mode. So edit mode is going to be basically how we take a basic primitive shape and turn it into something a little bit more customized. So this process is going to be called modeling. And the first thing that we're going to deconstruct is just object mode versus edit mode. So first off, there's going to be a couple more hotkeys that we're going to get to know. We'll cover these as we go, but these will be in the hotkey cheat sheet. So the first hotkey we want to get to know is tab. And you notice that tab changes object mode up here into edit mode. So what's the difference between these two things? So long story short, object mode, if we move things around, we're going to be moving around the object. And in edit mode, if we move things around, you notice if I select right here, I can now move the actual points on the object. So one's going to be editing is going to be modifying the object, and then object mode is going to be moving the object itself. So two different things happening there. So we can switch between this by simply doing the pull down menu here, object mode, edit mode. I'm primarily going to be using the hotkey tab to do this. The next up we have here is the selection mode right here. So this is going to be something very new. We have vertices, we have edges, and we have faces. These are the three different components that make up of any mesh inside of Blender. We have vertices over here, and then we have edges right there. So we can move around individual edges. And then we have faces just like this, and we can move around individual faces like that. Now, these hotkeys are also going to be on our hotkey cheat sheet. So to switch between vertex, edge, and face, we're going to use the hotkeys 1, 2, and 3. So tab to switch between object mode, edit mode, 1, 2, 3 to switch between vertex, edge, and face. So 1, vertices, move those. 2, edges, move those. 3, faces, move those. Now you also notice when we go from object mode to edit mode, we get two different menus. We get this menu right up here, and then this menu right here. These are going to be where we're doing our modeling operations, which is what we're going to be talking about next. These are the three most common modeling operations that we're going to do are going to be extrusions, insets, and loop cuts. So inside of our edit mode over here, we'll notice that we have this menu up here and this menu down here. So this is going to be where we're doing modeling operations. So what's the difference between these two? You can think of this down here as a shortcut for what we find in here, right? So if we come up here, we can see that we have, faces, all this stuff, edges, all this stuff, vertex, all this stuff. And then these in here, all these buttons down here are going to be somewhere in here. So you can think of these as the most common operations going to be over here. The ones that we're going to use the most, the first one we'll talk about is going to be extrusion right there. So what I'm going to do is select my face right here. So I'm selecting faces right now, and then I'm going to activate my extrude tool. And then what we get is this little handle right here. And if I move this up like this, this is an extrusion operation. We're basically taking that one polygon and extruding it forward. The next one up is we're going to have here is going to be the inset tool. So we're going to activate that. And then if I click and drag on this like this, we'll see that, okay, that's going to be our inset tool. It's basically taking those polygons and insetting them in. And the next up we have a loop cut right here. I'm going to go ahead and do one more extrude upwards like this, and then activate my loop cut. So loop cut, if we hover over an edge like this, we'll see that, okay, we now get this highlighting action here. And if we just click, it'll just confirm a loop cut on that. We can also do a click and drag like this, just like that. So this is an opportunity just to work on the default cube. What I would do is just kind of go through and just practice, maybe select some faces, go to your extrude region and maybe extrude some things out. Just play around, get really dirty. We're going to model out the gear in the next chapter, but get some practice just moving some things around, getting messy and just pushing things around. And we'll start modeling out the gear next. So we're going to take a basic cylinder shape and turn it into this gear shape right here. So back where we left off, I'm going to go and switch over to object mode up here by hitting tab, and then I'm just going to hit X to delete and then confirm delete. Now, whenever we're starting with modeling, we want to start with the closest primitive shape possible. So if we go up to our add menu right here, go over to mesh, we can add a basic primitive mesh. So we have spheres, we have cylinders, we have toruses. The one that's going to be matching us for the gear is going to be our cylinder right here. Now, as soon as we drop that in, before you touch anything else, we have this adjust last operation menu down here. So if you click off like this and you don't see it anymore, you'll have to reset. So it's the operation menu is adjust last operation. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the cylinder. Go ahead and add mesh and then cylinder. Now, while this is active, so while this is active up here, we'll go up here and go to vertices and change this to 12 right there. And then you'll see what happens here is we now just adjusted the sides of our cylinder right there. So instead of having 32 edges, we're going to have 12 to start with. So we'll be using this modeling last operation menu a lot as we go. So I'm in object mode right here. I'm going to go over to edit mode by hitting tab. And then what I'm going to do is jump into my scale mode. So I have everything selected. We have another hotkey here. We have two more hotkeys here. We have selection with A and deselect with double A. So A to select all, double A to select nothing. A to select all, double A to select nothing. So I'm just going to hit A to select everything, hit S to jump into my scale mode, and then scale this down like this. So we want to get that base gear shape like that. Now what we want to do is delete the top and the bottom sides. So I'm going to go in my face selection up here by hitting 3, select my face, then hit X, and then delete face right there. There we go. So we'll do the same thing. So while face is selected up here, select our face, hit X, and then delete faces like that. And there we go. Now we need to extrude this out to create the base shape. So I'll select everything by hitting A, or you can just click and drag like this. And then what we need to do here is extrude this out. So if I go to my extrude tool and extrude this out, you'll notice, okay, that's not what we want, right? So what we want to do is undo out of that and click and hold on this. So what we want to do is go to extrude along normals. What is extrude along normals? So basically extrude along normals is basically saying, okay, whatever the polygon direction is, perform the extrusion operation off of that. So instead of just going one direction entirely, it's going to be going wherever that polygon is facing. And a normal is basically where the polygon is facing. That's just what that is. Now what we want to do is another extrusion operation, but we'll select this and then we'll go around with our faces and we'll shift select these faces. So shift selection all the way around, just like that. There we go. And then what we'll do is we'll do another extrude along normals, just like that, click and drag, just like that. Great, so we're getting close. So we'll start talking about our subdivision modifier next. So we're going to go from here to there with our subdivision. And basically what subdivision do is just a way of smoothing out our object. We're going to take a look at modifiers this time. So modifiers, the modifier tab is going to be right here. And the reason why these are so important is because they're a non-destructive way to work inside of Blender when it comes to modeling operations. And non-destructive basically means, if we want to undo that original extrusion that we did to make this thick, we can't really do that without having to undo a bunch of times and then come back and then redo it. So you can think of non-destructive as procedural as a way to be able to modify it after you apply the operation. Now, while we're going to be working with our modifiers, we can just jump back out into object mode. We don't need to be in edit mode. So these are going to be things that we apply on top of our object. And if we go up here and select this, and then we come over here and we'll just go to our subdivision right here, subdivision surface, you notice our object now gets smooth. So let's break down what's happening here. I'm going to tab back into edit mode and then tab back and forth between object and edit mode. So we'll see that while we're in edit mode, we're going to see this cage mesh. That is our original mesh. And then the final result is what we're going to see right here, right? So this is our cage mesh. This is our subdivided mesh. Now, the reason why this is so important is because we can simply now click this little X button right there. We can remove that subdivision modifier and we can reapply it anytime we want, right? So it's going to be an operation on top of our model. And then what we can do here is if we go back into edit mode, if we wanted to do something like with all of these selected, what we can do is simply do another extrusion. We can do another extrude along normals. And you can see here, now we can model with this subdivision surface on top of it, which is really, really cool. This is one of my favorite areas of Blender, comparing it to other 3D applications like Maya, for example. Super, super powerful. So the subdivision surface modifier, let's break down what we see over here. At the top row right here, we have the ability to enable and disable depending on which location we're in. So the first one is going to be our display cage mesh. For the most part, I have this off all the time. This is going to disable that just so I can model with my cage mesh on. So I'm going to be viewing the cage mesh and modeling based off that. Next up, we have edit mode. So if we have that off, basically what happens is if we toggle between object mode and edit mode, it's only going to be visible in object mode now. So we're turning off the ability to see this in edit mode. So I'm going to turn that back on. And then we have our viewport display or our real-time display. So this one's turning off completely so we can't see it inside of the viewport at all. If we go to render image up here, all of a sudden we'll start to be able to see that again. And then the last button we have here is display and render. So if we hit the render button again up here, we now see, okay, now it's not going to be displayed in the render. So now it's completely turned off. So how do we want to work? Well, for the most part, we can just leave these by default. I'll be playing around with these as we go and showing you guys a couple different techniques on when I use them, when I don't. And then from here, what we do is, we have just two different options in here. We'll have levels in the viewport and then render. So basically what this means is how much do we want to see in the viewport itself? I'm going to put a value of 2 here. And then how much do we actually want to see whenever we hit render image right here. And we're just going to leave that as a value of 2. And there we go. The last thing we want to talk about is just the smoothing of the normals. You notice how our polygons look kind of weird right now. We see all these different faces. If we just simply right click here and then just do shade smooth. So we want to make sure that we're in object mode right now. So if you notice, if I go back to edit mode and right click, we don't see that, right? So right clicking is going to be different depending on if we're in edit mode or in object mode. So I'm going to go to object mode, right click and shade smooth. And that's just going to smoothen all that out. Great, and we're going to take a look at the bevel modifier next. So a bevel modifier is basically how we control the edges. So you can see here, these edges are really soft and really round, and then these edges are nice and crisp. So that's what a bevel modifier is going to help us do. And we can take another look right here with a cube. So this is just a simple cube with a bevel modifier put on top of it. It's just helping us control how round the edges are. So back here in my gear scene, so we can find the bevel modifier inside of our add modifier list over here. But before we actually add this, we want it to actually happen before we put on the subdivision surface. So if we actually put our modifier on here and we go bevel, we'll notice that we don't actually see any different. In fact, it kind of gets worse in the sense that, we get these faceted edges back, right? Where we can actually see those polygons coming back up. And this is happening because the modifier stack works from top down. So whatever operation you have up here is going to be applied first, and then this operation is going to be applied second, and so on and so forth. So it's the opposite of what you would expect from like a Photoshop stack. And then all these operations happen on top of each other. So what we're going to do here is just simply exit out of our subdivision modifier right here. And that's just going to allow us to work with the bevel. And to be able to see this a little bit better, what I'm going to do is come up here to my viewport shaded mode right up there, or my wireframe mode right here. And we talked about solid mode, we talked about rendered mode. Now we're going to jump into wireframe mode, which is we're going to be getting into this a lot whenever we get into modeling. And wireframe, and we're going to be switching back and forth between wireframe and solid a lot. And this is just going to help us actually see the cage of our mesh. And you can see here what the modifier is doing now. If I want to come in here and just toggle on this real-time display, you can see here's before and after. So it's going to be rounding our edges. Now we have a couple different controls to get to know in here. The first one's going to be amount. So if we want this to be a little bit brighter, we can turn that up. So if we do something like, a value of go all the way up. So you can see here that if we go up too high, it's actually going to stop. That's happening because this length right there is only going to allow it to go so far. So if I make this a value of something like 0.1, for example, or 0.05, maybe we'd go a little bit lower than that, 0.01, we can see that we have, okay, now we're starting to see some results. So 0.03, 0.05, we can start to see that we have some changes happening here. And the next step, we have our segments. So how many polygons do we actually want to see? If we switch this up to something like 3, see, okay, now the edges become even more round, right? Just by boosting up the segments here. And then the last thing that we want to get to know is going to be limit method. So limit method is basically going to be how we choose this based on an angle. I'm going to choose angle right here. And basically what that says is based on this angle right here, how sharp is it? And if it's sharp enough between this angle right here, which is 30 degrees, it's going to apply the operation. So you notice that, if we turn this off, we have this right here. And as soon as we switch this over to angle, we all of a sudden don't have it. That's because it's limiting based on this angle. It's 30 degrees. So for example, this edge that is being beveled is essentially 0 degrees. So it's not going to actually find it based on this value. Now, if we go up on this, something like 60, for example, you notice these edges get shut off because this is less than that 60 degree angle. And if we can go higher, something like 80, I think 80, 60 will probably be the same result, but essentially this is going to be a 90 degree angle right here. So for us setting that to 80 degrees right there, that's going to be us telling Blender only do sharp corners and then leave the rest alone, which is exactly what we want in this specific case. Now, if we go over to solid mode again up here, what we can see here, if we now drop in our subdivision modifier, we now get a nice smooth surface that makes a little bit more sense for what we want. I'm just going to go ahead and change the level displays to 2. And there we go. And that's that. That's going to wrap it up for the gear. So the sword's going to be what we're moving into next. And it's going to be, a good transition, but it's going to be a challenge. So what you want to do is make sure you're comfortable modeling out this gear. So I recommend doing it 5 different times and continue doing it. You can follow along with the step-by-step screenshots underneath you down below. And then keep doing this until you can do it by memory. You don't need the video. You don't need the step-by-step screenshots anymore. And after you can do this by memory, then you'll be ready to do the sword in the next chapter. All right, so here's where we're headed. We're going to start working on our sword model. And the very first step is going to be to block in the basic shapes. So to look at this a little bit closer, we're basically just going to block in with some cubes, some cylinders, and a couple more cylinders. And just like you're painting a picture or sketching a sketch, we're going to start with our broad strokes, and then we'll slowly add in the fine details over here. So we're going to work on this now. So I'm in a new scene. You can just do File, New, General. And basically I got a little preset set up here. I'm going to show you really quick. But I have my sword in here. I'm going to keep this in here just to reference, just so I can point out what we're going to be doing. You don't need to have this in your scene. You can just start with a fresh scene and you'll be good to go. So I'm going to give you guys the basics of the measurements that we're going to use. Feel free to experiment, just scale this in, scale it down, all that good stuff. If you want to follow along exactly, I'm going to be giving you my exact value. So over here in our transform properties over here, we're going to do a scale of 0.04, 0.015, and then 0.0, and then 0.605. So how did I come up with those measurements? This is just from when I originally prepped it. So if you want to follow along exactly, those will be the values. Now we're going to add in this basic cylinder right there. We're going to start with the cylinder, and then we're basically going to take this and then extrude it off of that. So we'll go ahead and add in a cylinder. So we'll go add, mesh, and then cylinder. And then we want to make sure that our cylinder up here, we're going to start with, in this adjust last properties action, we're going to do a value of 10 verts. And then we're going to scale this down. We're going to do 0.043, 0.025, and then 0.02 right there. And then we're going to move this up in the z-axis. We're going to do 0.625, and that'll just make it sit right up there. Great, so that's going to be our guard. We'll have our handle right there. So go ahead and add object. We'll do mesh, then we'll do cylinder. So same values that we're going to use from before. 10 vertices is going to be fine for this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set this to be 0.016 for X, Y, and Z for the scale. And then we're going to move this up in Z, and that's going to be 0.745. And I'm going to go ahead and frame select it on that. And then the Z here, what we're going to do is just do a value of 0.105 for the scale. Next up, we have our polymetal cylinder right here. So we're going to add another cube or another cylinder. We'll do mesh and then add cylinder. And then the values for these are going to be 0.88 in the Z. And then we're going to do 0.13, 0.013, 0.013, and then 0.038 in the Z. And that'll be good for that. We'll zoom in and make sure that's all good to go. That's looking good. And then the last thing that we have to do is just do another cylinder for this one up here. And then we'll go ahead and add a cylinder for the tip right here. So we'll do add object mesh, and then we'll do cylinder. And the values for this are going to be a value of 0.02 for the scale. And then the Z axis will be 0.94. And then we're going to rotate this 90 degrees in X. So it's going to be rotated this way right here. So that's going to be it for blocking this in. And in the next chapter, we're going to start blocking in the handle right here. And again, you don't have to follow these exact steps, but if you want to follow along, they're all right there for you. So we're going to start modeling out the handle next. So we're going to work on our handle right here, and we're going to go from here all the way to over here, specifically adding in all these grooves and all of that, all those fine details. So before we get going, I want to show you guys the concept of applying transforms. I have two different objects over here, and the problem is that we have went in here and on the object level, we have scaled these, right? And that's not a problem if you know what you're doing. But right now, if we just jump into edit mode and start making a bunch of operations, we're going to run into a lot of issues. So I have an example over here to show you what that means. So you can see over here, this bevel right here, that's a problem. And it's looking fine over here, but it doesn't look fine over here. That's because this right here, the scale values are 1, 1, 1. And then this one right here, this one has a scale value, just like all of our objects. Now, what's happening here is this has a bevel operation on it. And just like any modeling operation, the modeling operation happens underneath the object transform. So it's happening underneath this. So which that means is this bevel right here is getting stretched like this, right? So in order to fix that, what we have to do is just simply to go to Object, Apply, and then Scale. So basically, before we do any modeling operations, we always want to apply the scale. And there you see that we have the bevel is now fixed. So long story short, the scale value should always be at 1 before we start modeling. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these two examples. So to get going, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here on the frame selected. And then I'm going to go ahead and jump into edit mode. And what I'm going to do here is, before I get going, I want to scale this in. So you can see here how this is a little bit tapered this way, just like that, like a triangle. We want to apply that same thing happening here. So you'll notice that when we're in object mode, we have our Q frame selected. But whenever we go into edit mode, we miss that. So in edit mode, I'm going to do is go ahead and add that. So I'll do view, right click, and add to quick favorites on that. So I can jump around pretty easily in edit mode too. So Q frame selected right there. So what I want to do here is jump into my edit mode by hitting 2, select my edge here, and then what we're going to do is select, and then we're going to do loops, and then select edge loops. And what an edge loop is basically a loop around wherever those edges are connected. It's going to select that as well. I'm going to jump into my scale, and then I'm going to bring this in like this, something right in there. And then I'm going to do the opposite for this down here. So I'm going to jump into wireframe mode, go into my edge mode by hitting 2, select that right here, and then do select loops, edge loops. And then we're going to get and scale that up just like that. So now we have a little bit of that tapering happening. I'm going to go back into my solid mode. And what I'm going to do now is add in some loop cuts to do the bevels right here, these engravings right there. So Q frame selected, so we can get back in here quick. And then we're going to do loop cut. Then I'm just going to click right there. Now I'm going to open up my adjust last action properties. What I'm going to do is set this loop cuts. I'm going to drag that up, and then I'm going to set that to a value of 15. I'm going to make sure my factor is also set to a value of 0. Now what I'm going to do is go back in my move tool or my scale tool up here. I'm going to collapse that. And what we want to do is now deselect every other one of these. Now the way we do deselections on these is if we go in our edge tool, I'm going to go ahead and alt click on this like this. And that's going to select one loop. And then what we can do here is if we do alt shift click, we can now go every other one just like this. So this is the same thing that we did up here with the select edge loops, but now we're going to do it with a shortcut. So shift alt click, and we'll do every other one. And I'll go into my wireframe, make sure that's good. There we go. So now what we want to do is scale this out. So I'm going to not do this because that's going to do 3 different directions. What I'm going to do here is just scale this out like this. And then we're going to set the resize value of just being like 1.2 and 1.2. So just in the X and Y. And now we're going to do the opposite for the inner loops. So we'll go into edge mode. We'll do alt click to just select one. Then we'll do alt shift click to select the next ones right there. So we'll keep going up. Just like that. Go into my wireframe so I can see that a little bit better. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and scale this in. So I'm going to scale on one axis. And then while my adjust last action properties are up, we're going to do 0.9 and 0.9. There we go. So now I'm going to go ahead and add in my subdivision modifier. So I'm going to add modifier and then do subdivision. Now, if we look in object mode now, and if we just do right click shade smooth, we have a couple different problems. One of which, if I just move this out over here a little bit, one, we're getting like this weird thing right there. So we got a fix that. So I'm going to go into object mode here, and I'm going to go into my face selection by hitting 3, and then select that face up there. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that by hitting X and then delete faces. There we go. So that's not going to cave in on itself anymore. And I'm going to do the same thing down here. And if I can't see it, what we can just do and go into wireframe mode. And then again, it can be a little bit hard to see, but basically the faces in wireframe mode, if we look, they have little dots in the middle. So what we want to do is select that dot, which will select that full polygon, and then X and then delete faces, just like that. And then we'll go back into object mode. I'm going to go back into my solid mode. I'm going to reset this. So move that back. I'm just going to do 0 and X. And now the last thing that we want to do is crease or add some holding edges right here in the center. So you can see here with the other one here, we have this one, which is basically it's doing this thing right there. It's not doing this, right? So the way we do that is by simply adding in a bevel to this. So I'll zoom in here, object mode, and then what I'm gonna do here is go into my wireframe mode. And then what we can do to see this a little bit better is just turn off subdivision in edit mode. And then we'll just go to edge mode and then select edge loop by alt left click. And then we'll do all the way up again. Just like that. So we have all those edges selected. And then what we want to do is add in a holding edge there, and we can do that by adding a bevel. So we've added bevel modifier before, but now we're going to add in a bevel on the actual geometry itself. While our edge loops are selected, we'll go over to our bevel tool right here. We'll go ahead and click that. And then if I just click and drag this up, you'll see, okay, now we get to those edges. So beveling is basically we're just taking one single edge and making more edges from that. Very, very simple. There we go. And then I'm going to just go jump into tab mode, jump back into my solid mode. And there we go. That's looking pretty good. And then last thing that we want to do is we just want to jump back into edit mode. I'm going to select everything by hitting A. And we're just going to go ahead and scale this in so it's a little bit flatter on one side. So I'll jump into my scale mode by hitting S and then drag this in on one axis right there. And I'll just do something like a value of 0.9 on that. Maybe 0.85 actually, just to shrink that in a little bit. There we go. Now it's going to be a little bit more of an oval than a circular shape. Great, so that's our handle. And then in the next chapter, we'll start modeling out the guard. For me, the toughest part about learning 3D modeling when I first started was following along with the video. It was very easy to miss this button, very easy to miss that button, and before you know, you have to stop, rewind, and struggle to find just the next step to the process. This is a brutally exhausting process, which is why we at cgfasttrack.com built the step-by-step screenshot application and we put it into every single one of our courses. This would have saved me so much time and frustration and makes it so much easier and enjoyable to learn 3D animation. After you're done watching the video here on YouTube, click the link in the description and follow along there. So we're going to start working on our guard, specifically taking our cylinder from here to here. And this is going to take a couple different chapters. So we want to focus on right now is just getting this initial extrusion set up. And we're going to run into a little bit of problems along the way. So I'm going to break it down. So I'm going to go ahead and select my cylinder, Q, frame selected, so we can work on this a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and just go into edit mode. And we're going to go ahead in the face mode over here by hitting 3, select this, and we'll do our initial extrusion. I'll go ahead and select my extrude, make sure I'm on extrude region, and go ahead and click and drag that out, just like that. And I'll go ahead and just jump into my move tool, move this out, jump into my scale tool, and scale this in, and then just a little bit in here like this. And we're just going to move this down like that. Now, we want to set up our subdivision, our bevel, and all of that as we work so we can constantly check and make sure everything's working together. So what I'm going to do here is go to my modifier stack and just add in a bevel modifier so we can see what we're doing here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change our limit method over to angle, which will prevent areas like this. So we're going to set this up to something like a value of 60. So that's going to prevent, areas like this from getting beveled. So it's just going to bevel the edge right here, which is exactly what we're looking for. We're going to set the bevel amount to something like 0.05. We'll do segments of value of 3. And there we go. So now we're getting pretty close. And you'll notice here that we have a problem. So here as well, this is getting stretched. This bevel on the top looks different than that. And if you can remember what we talked about, we need to apply our transform. So go ahead and go back into object mode. While this is selecting, go to object and then apply and then scale. And then you'll see, okay, all of a sudden our bevel is way different. So super important to remember to do that each time we jump into a model. And I'll just do 0.01. Or I'll go a little bit lower on this. I'm just going to click and drag on this. I'll do something like 0.001 for that, 0.001. Segments of 3 is looking good. Great. And then what we'll do now is set up our subdivision surface so that all of this stuff gets smoothed out. So add modifier, we'll do subdivision surface. Now we run into this really bad problem right here, which all this stuff happening right here. And essentially what's happening right here is that there's no holding edge. That's one problem. And then another problem that we're going to run into is this n-gon up here. And if I jump into edit mode up here, and I can see here, okay, this is a quad. This is a quad. I'm going to go ahead and disable these things in edit mode. I'm going to turn this off, so we can see this a little bit better. So this is a quad because it has 4 sides, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Quads are good. Quads are what we want most of the time. We're going to be getting into this kind of stuff a little bit more in depth in a different course, specifically Blender Fundamentals. But long story short, this face up here is an n-gon, which means it has more than 4 sides, which means we don't want that, right? So we need to fix that and add a holding edge on there as well. Holding edge being an edge that's going to go on both sides right here. Now to do this, what we're going to do is drop in an inset both on the top and the bottom. So I'll select faces, select this right here, and then shift select right here. And then while I'm going to go to wireframe so I can see this a little bit better. And then while this is here, I'm going to do inset like this, and then click and drag right there. Now you can see, okay, now we have a holding edge right there. And then we're going to click and drag this again, and then one more time again. And now what we'll do is simply merge those faces together. So we're going to end up with triangles. So I'll select this face right there. I'll go to mesh and then merge up here, and then we'll do merge at center. And it's a little bit hard to see, but now they're going to be triangles. And to see this a little bit better, what I'm going to do is jump into my solid mode up here. I'm going to move this out here a little bit more so we can see this. And then if I jump into edit mode again, we can see this a little bit better. So now we have a triangle, 1, 2, 3. So triangles are okay, generally speaking, on flat surfaces. Again, we're not trying to be too picky right now. We're just trying to make something that is going to be our first project. So it's okay if it's a little rough around the edges. So we'll select the bottom face now, and then we'll do mesh, merge, and then at center. There we go. Now, whenever we jump out of tab and we can see this all being taken place together, Now it's going to be okay. Now that's looking better. Specifically, if we right click and do shade smooth, now you can see, okay, that's looking a lot better. And I'm just going to go back into my object mode here and then zero out this transform to reset that back. There we go. And then I'm just going to go to my modifier stack here, and then we can just go ahead and change the level of the viewport to 2. So now we basically have our base set up. So what we're going to do now in the next one is set up our mirror modifier so that we only have to model this on one side. So the mirror modifier is going to automatically take one side and copy it to the other. So let's take a look at how to set that up. First off, we need to hack off one side. So I'll go back into my edit mode here, and I'll go ahead and just select all these faces. And a good way to do this is just by going to wireframe mode, select our faces, and then we'll just click and drag like this. I'm just going to make sure I have my move tool selected so I don't accidentally perform a modeling operation here. And then we'll just hit X, and then we'll do delete faces. There we go. So now we have one side. Now what we want to do is add a modifier and then do mirror, just like that. And by default, it's going to be all good. Just to give you a tour of the mirror modifier, basically the most important attribute that we want to make sure set up right is going to be this axis. And how you know that's set up right is basically right now we need a mirror on the x-axis. And you can see the x-axis right here, right? So we need to flip it on this side right there. So as long as you're following along, exactly that should work, but you might have to switch it over to like Z or Y, for example, and that'll do the other axis. I'm going to leave it on X. Now, if we go into edit mode here and then go back into solid mode here, we can see that we have a problem. And specifically, there's going to be this pinching thing happening there. So what is that about? Basically, what's happening here is this this mirror modifier is operating last. It's operating after the bevel, after the subdivision, and then it's basically, just the subdivision. The way it works is it's going to pinch like that. So to fix this, what we want to do is drag and drop this all the way up to the top. And this is a new Blender 2.9 thing. So if you're working in 2.8, you won't be able to drag and drop. There'll be arrow buttons up there to go up and down. So you can see there before, after. So that's what we're after. Great. And then if we go into edit mode again, and if we simply just select a face over here. So I'm going to go in 3, select the face, and then move up and down like that. You can see that is going to automatically be applied to the other side, which is exactly what we want. Great. And then in the next chapter, we're going to start finishing off the rest of our extrusions. So we're going to finish off the rest of the shapes here. So to do this, what we're going to do is add in a loop cut, and then we're going to extrude out. So I'm going to go to my loop cut tool, click and drag. So be really, really careful when you're working with the loop cut. It's really easy just to click and then forget the drag. And then I'm just going to go over to my move tool to get out of this. A really, really common problem with the loop cut tool, if you are working, you accidentally click like that. If you do that, just Control Z out of that, Control Z, and then immediately just get onto a different tool. So what I usually do is just hit G after that, which will just make sure that I don't accidentally insert another loop cut just by accidentally clicking. And then I'm going to go to my face mode up here by hitting 3, select this, and then what we're going to do is extrude down. So I'm going to make sure I have extrude region selected. I'm going to click this. And then I don't want to do it too far because you can see we're at a weird angle like this. So what I'm going to do here is just move this out a little bit like that. And then what I'm going to do here is just go into my move tool. Just like that. So now we're going straight down basically. There we go. And now we need to do the same thing but for this side over here. So add in a loop cut. So click and drag on that loop cut right there. Immediately jump into my move tool to get out of loop cut. And then I'm going to jump into my extrusion over here. So I'm going to select the front face right here. So 3 for faces, and then select that. And then again, extrude this out. And again, this one, it's a little bit tough because we're at that weird angle. So what I'm going to do is just extrude out once. And then immediately what you want to avoid doing here is if you wanted to go more, you don't want to do that because then we're doing 2 extrusions. So I'm going to undo out of that, hit G, and then move this out like that. And then what I can do is just eye this up. So move that down just like that. Great, so that's looking good. We do want to scale this a little bit. So we want to taper this in. So I'm going to jump into my scale tool. So S to scale, and then taper that in just like this. So the starting point will be thicker, and then it's going to end a little bit skinnier. And now what I want to do is do the same thing here. So I'm going to jump into wireframe mode here. And then what I'm going to do is go into vert selection and then click and drag right here to select those verts, and then do the same thing. Scale that in just a little bit. and then do the same thing for this one right here. So drag selection and then scale this in. And this is going to be just eyeing it up. Just like that. So I'm going to jump back into solid mode so we can see this a little better. So you can see here now, it's thick at the base and then tapered in and skinnier like that at the bottom or at the tip there. Great, so if we jump back out of edit mode, we can see we have a problem here. And this is where we get into holding edges once again, and we're going to fix this in the next chapter. So before we add the holding edges, what we need to do is get this shape right here to match this shape. Currently, it's a little too long right here. So what I'm going to do is go into my wireframe mode right up here. I'm going to go into my move tool, go ahead and select all these verts by hitting 1. Select those verts. I'm just going to go ahead and move this up like this so that this rests right in there. And then what I'm going to do here is just bring this out a little bit more and then just scale this down a little bit more like that. And then what I want to do is just thicken this up a little bit more. So this thing's going to be a guard, so it needs to feel really heavy. Currently it's feeling a little too skinny. So we'll go ahead and scale this out like this. Just like that. And now, before we go ahead and start fixing our holding edge, so if we go back to solid mode right here and see our issues. So we got these issues right here to fix. And before we do that, what we want to do is make sure that this thing is perfect. So we'll go ahead and make any final tweaks right now. And this is all looking pretty good. I think I'll tweak this part just a little bit. So what I'm looking at here is just trying to make sure this line right here and then this line right here are going to be parallel. Any final tweaks that you might want to have in here. And then we also want to make sure that this is going to be paralleled right up here as well. So if I come up here and check this out, you'll see, okay, this area right here, it's going like this, where it's kind of coming in and then it kind of goes down like that. So we want this to be a straight line all the way down. And what we can do is start utilizing our orthographic views. If I go up to view up here, we'll go to viewport. And if I just go up to the top right here, we can now view this just directly at the top view. And I'll go up to my wireframe mode up right here. And I'll go ahead and select this and then go ahead and scale this. So S, scale that up. And then right there as well. So we want this to be a straight line right here. And if we just simply rotate around, we can get out of that orthographic view. Go back into solid mode again. And now start adding in a loop cut. So you want to make any final tweaks that you have before you start doing this. So I'm going to add my loop cuts. I'll go in here, loop cut right here. And then these are going to be essentially our holding edges. And holding edges basically is just going to be a way for this shape to hold its form. So I'll continue that up, move that up. There you go. I'll add on each side just like this. And there we go. And then I'll just tab out of this so we can see that a little bit better. You see we're still getting some tearing. So I'll go ahead and click and drag right there. And then click and drag right up here. And there you go. So you can see that's starting to look better. And then you just want to keep toggling back and forth between tab and edit mode and continue to add your loop cuts until the tears are all going to be removed. So go ahead, click and drag right there. There we go. And then I'll go ahead and do this side down here. And there we go. So go ahead and do one final turnaround to see how it looks. That's looking pretty good. I'll go ahead and add in a loop cut up here as well, so that this holds its form as well. And there we go. We'll go ahead and wrap that up right there. So we want to start working on the palm mouse. Specifically, what we're going to do right now is work on this part right here. So we'll go ahead and select our cylinder up here. We'll go into edit mode. And then what we want to do is just taper this off at the top. So we'll go into edge mode up here. We'll do alt click, and then we'll go ahead and scale this in like that. Just so it's now continuing that same tapered motion. And now what we need to do is just delete the top and the bottom here. So I'm going to select this face. I'm going to come in here, select that face, hit X, delete faces, and then do the same thing for the bottom here. Select that, hit X, delete faces. Now what we need to do here is jump into vert mode by hitting 1. I'll jump into my selection here, and I'll select every other one. So I'm doing shift click to select all the way around. And then what we're going to do is, while we're in our scale mode here, scale this in like that. Great. And then we're going to do the same thing for the opposite side. So I'll select every other one again, just the opposite there. Zoom in here a little bit more and scale that out just like that. And now what we can do is just add in that subdivision modifier here. So I'm going to go back into object mode by hitting tab and then modifier, add subdivision modifier. And then what we'll do is just right click, shade smooth. We'll add another level to the subdivision here. That's looking pretty good. We'll go ahead and check out this bottom. We'll clean this stuff up in a bit. And in the next chapter, we're going to start adding the cylindrical shapes that sits right on the top. So we're going to add in these torus shapes that sit right here. So if we go into edit mode again, we can now add in objects while we're in edit mode. So we've been mainly adding in objects while we're in object mode. Whenever we add in an object in edit mode, we're going to be adding geometry to this existing mesh. So they're technically going to be one object, but they're going to be two different shapes, right? So if we just do something like this where we add and then do add torus right there, we'll get something like this. And the problem with this right now is that it's creating this at the center, and we could just manually move it up and all that, but we're going to do this little trick with the cursor. So I'm going to Q frame selected to jump back in here, and I'm going to go into edge mode. I'm going to alt click and select that edge loop right there. And now what I'm going to do here is go to mesh, snap, and we're going to do cursor to selected. So what is cursor? Cursor is this little thing right there. And when you open up Blender, that'll just be hanging out here at the origin because that's where the default location is for things to be created, right? So whenever we select something and then do mesh, snap, cursor to selected, it's snapping that there. So the next time that we do mesh and then, or add, and then we'll do torus, it's now going to be located right there where we have our selection, which is really, really awesome. So we'll be using that quite a bit as we go forward. Now we want to adjust these torus settings a bit. We'll set our major segments to 32. That's just going to lower the resolution of this geometry a little bit. We'll do minor segments to 8, which is again going to lower that resolution a little bit. And then we'll do major radius 0.01 and then minor radius 0.002. And now if we just simply do Q, frame selected, we'll see, okay, now that's going to be all right there and good to go. We can scale it up now if we want to. That's looking pretty good. I'm just going to leave it there. And again, all these values came from the first time I built this. So these are not just me guessing the right answer. You can always just tweak this if you like drag in like that. But I'm going to leave it at the 0.002 for now. And then we're going to do the same thing for the bottom here. So I'm going to collapse that and then go to my edge mode, alt click down here, and then we'll do mesh, snap, and then cursor to selected. And then there we go. We can see our cursor again is going to be snapped right there. And again, the cursor is up here. That's where we find this. So if we click and drag right here, so if I just click on this, and if I just move this around, now this is going to be where things are being created. So if I just do like mesh and then do add torus, for example, it's going to be made up there. I'm going to undo out of that and then just redo this. We'll do mesh, snap, cursor to selected. So now this cursor is now moved right there. I'm going to jump into G to get out of that. And we'll just do mesh, or we'll do add, we'll do torus. And then we'll just go ahead from here and we'll jump into scale mode. And then we'll just go ahead and scale this up. So it's wrapping around there like that. Something like that. And to wrap this up, I'm just going to make sure that, we don't see any penetration issues right here. So I'm going to go into object mode. I'm going to right click shade smooth to get rid of that faceted right there. I'm going to go into my handle right here, go into edit mode, go into wireframe, and then we'll just edge mode right here, alt click, and then scale this in like that. And we'll just tuck this in right here. Jump out of wireframe into solid mode, jump back into edit mode, and then there we go. Great, and we'll start working on the tip next. So we're going to start working on the tip of our Polymer right now. So first off, before we go on, we're going to apply our scale just like we have been doing. So go to Object, Apply, Scale. So the last chapter, we didn't actually do that on this one. And you can see here, we still have our scale operations there. Now, we just did very, very basic things. So we didn't necessarily need to do that there. But if I just go ahead and do Object, Apply, Scale, you notice that, okay, nothing really changed there. That's totally fine. But whenever we do things like extrusions, bevel, and sets, we definitely want to do that. So I'll go here and we'll go ahead and get to work. So first step, we're just going to edit mode. And what we want to do is block in the front shape. Just like we're painting a picture or drawing a sketch, we want to start with our broad strokes and then we'll slowly work in the fine details. So what we want to do here is add in a loop cut, and then I'm just going to add in center, click, and then go into my properties down here, and I want to make sure I'm on 1 and make sure I'm on 0 here. So, and then we'll just add another one here. We'll click, and then same thing, make sure that we have factor at 0, and then a number of loop cuts 1. And then what we'll do is jump out of here. We'll jump into scale by hitting S, hit 3 to jump into face mode up here, and select that. And then we'll just go and select this and scale that in like that. Great. And then what we're going to do is drop in our inset. So we're going to do inset right here, and then inset that in. And then we're going to do is go to our extrusion, and then extrude that in like that. And then we'll go ahead and do an inset again. Before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and drop in a subdivision surface or subdivision modifier just so we can see what's happening here a little bit better. So add in subdivision modifier, and I'm going to jump into my object mode up here, right click, shade smooth, and then jump back down into edit mode. Now you can see here, this isn't holding its shape at all very well. So this is where we want to start adding in some holding edges again. I'm going to go ahead and turn off subdivision edit mode. Now we can tab back and forth to see the final result. So now I'm going to jump in and grab my inset tool and click and drag right here. And then, so now that's one holding edge right there. If we tab, we can see, okay, now that's holding its shape a lot more. And I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this N-gon by clicking and dragging, and then clicking and dragging again. And then what I'm going to do is just go to mesh, merge, and then do merge at center. So now we have a bunch of triangles, which is going to be better in this case, except for instead of having that N-gon there. Great. So the shape of this is looking pretty good. Again, when we jump into subdivision mode, it's collapsing too much. So we want to add in some more holding edges. And we can do that with our loop cut tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click and drag right here. Add in a loop cut there, click and drag there, click and drag there. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this a little bit more. Click and drag over here, and then click and drag right here. And then do 2 on both sides right there. And now when we go into edit mode, you can see, okay, now all of that's holding its shape a lot better. And if we want to tighten this up a little bit, we can always add in a holding edge right there as well. Jump back out with tab. I'm going to go ahead and subdivide this a little bit more. I'm going to do a value of 2. So it's going to be smoothing that a little bit more. Great. And then we're going to mirror this next and then finish off the tip in the next chapter. So we're going to finish off the very last part of the pommel, which is this tip right here. So first off, we're going to set up our mirror so we have the same on the back that we have on the front. So I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm just going to go ahead and hack away on this. I'm going to jump out of my loop cut tool by hitting G, and then go ahead and select my faces, jump into my wireframe, and then just click and drag to select these right there. So we have that loop cut happening right down the middle. So that's going to be exactly half. So we'll go ahead and select all these and then X, delete faces. And then we'll go ahead and do add modifier, and then we'll do mirror. All right, so we dropped in the mirror and we don't really see anything happening here. That's because we're currently set to X and we need to flip it on this axis right here. So how do we know which axis to do? Well, if we look up here, it's going to tell us right here. And if we see these axes, you can see we have Z right here, X, and Y. And this one's going to be a little bit extra confusing. So you would think that we would do Y right now, right? So I'm just going to do Y, and it doesn't do anything. But if we do Z, it does. Why is that? Well, this is going to go back to our transforms tool that we were talking about earlier. If I go into object mode right now and go over to my transform properties, we have a rotation on our X value, right? So super important to know that we have that. Now, that's totally fine. It's not going to, crash or distort our model in any way. But whenever we do mirror operations like this, it is going to set it off on the wrong axis. So if we do this object apply rotation now, it's going to zero out these rotations, and now we can essentially apply this modifier in a predictable way. So now if we set this to Y and turn off X, there we go. Now we're going to be all set up. Great. So we're just going to edit mode. I'm just going to hit A to select everything. And you can see here, we're only working with one side now. I'm going to jump into my face mode and just select these two right at the top. jump back into my solid mode up here, and then I'm just going to do an extrusion. So grab my extrude tool and then extrude up like this. There we go. And now I'll jump into my scale tool and then scale in like this. And then I don't want to do this. I don't want to scale like this. What I want to do is go to my vert selection with 1, select these 3 right there, then go to my move tool and then move this back. Now if we look at this in object mode, we'll see we have a couple different problems, specifically this big seam right there. So we talked a little bit about this earlier, why this happens. And basically we have this subdivision modifier happening before our mirror. So we want to drag and drop this above there. So now we have something like this, where we have this really weird seam happening here. So what's happening there? So anytime I'm in a scenario like this and I'm trying to troubleshoot, the best thing to do is start stripping things down and then work backwards from there. So specifically, we have these 2 modifiers on. So what we want to do is just shut these off. I'm going to turn off visibility in the viewport just like that and just kind of investigate. And you'll notice that when we go around right here, we have topology on the back. We have some faces on the back that we need to get rid of. So we'll go into tab mode, face selection, and then we'll select this, shift select the other one, hit X, and then delete faces, just like that. And then turn those back on, view that up. That's looking good. And then all we have to do is add in our final holding edges. So we'll go ahead and drop in our loop cuts right here on this side, right there. And then that's going to wrap that up in terms of modifying the mesh. And then what we're going to do is jump back into object mode and just do a bird's eye view of how the entire base is looking. And you can see, okay, this is looking pretty thick up here compared to this. So what I'm going to do is just scale that in. So I'm going to scale this in like this, so that it's looking a little bit more like the rest of this, and then go ahead and bring that down like this. Something right in there. Great, and then in the next chapter, we'll start working on the blade. Next up, we're gonna block out the silhouette to our blade. So I'm gonna jump into edit mode, and what I'm gonna do down here is just come in here and add in a loop cut right down the center. So loop cut right down there. And then what I want to do here is make sure that my last action properties right here, I want to make sure that the factor is going to be set to 0. And that's just going to make sure that it's set right down the center. And what I'm going to do here is just go ahead and jump back into my move tool, jump off my loop cut tool right there. And then what I'm going to do here is just select these 2 verts right here. So hit 1, click and drag to select those verts. And what we're going to do is mesh. We're going to do merge. We're going to do merge at center. And we're going to repeat that for each one of these. So I'll select these, and then we'll do mesh, merge, at center, just like that. And we'll go around, do the same thing, rinse and repeat for each one. And now we need to go ahead and do the top as well. So go ahead and select these verts up here. I'll do Q frame selected, and then I'll do the same thing for the edge right here. So select those, mesh, merge at center, and then we'll do the same thing down here. Select those, mesh, merge at center. And then down here at the bottom, what we want to do is go ahead and sharpen that up. So go ahead and add in a loop cut. I'll click and drag all the way down, somewhere around 4/5 down. Go ahead and close that. And then what I'll do here is just go into my vert selection here, go to my scale tool, select these, and I want to make sure I have those all selected down here. So I'm going to go into my wireframe mode really quick and just select them right there to make sure I have all those that are selected. And then I'm just going to scale this in. And after I scale this, I'm going to try to get it close as I can down to be perfectly sharp. But what we can do is in our resize menu down here, after we do that last action, we can just do a value of 0 with this scale. Now I'll just snap it so that's going to be perfectly sharp. Go back into my solid mode up here. Go ahead and zoom that out. Check that out. That's looking pretty good. And then in the next chapter, we'll start working out the groove. So we're going to implement the groove right down the center of our blade. So I'm going to come down here, just select all this, Q, frame selected, and then I'm going to go ahead and add in some loop cuts right down the center right here. So loop cut right here. I'll go ahead and just click right there. Make sure our factor is set to 0, and then do the same thing over here. Just click right there, and then make sure our factor is set to 0. And then what I do is just jump into my wireframe tool right here, jump into my scale tool by hitting S, and we'll go ahead and select these verts right here, and just go ahead and scale these in just like that. My Q frame is selected to zoom in here a little bit more. Scale those in nice and tight. And then what we want to do is select the center one right here. It's just going to scale those back so that these are going to just be flush right there. And now we'll go ahead and just work on the top up here. So I'll go ahead and select all the way up here. Q frame selected. And then we got some polygons up here that are sitting up here in the faces. So I'll go to 3 to select those faces, select each one of these. So I'll select each one by hitting Shift left click and then X and then delete faces just to get rid of those at the top. Go into my vert mode, select those right there, and then bring those in somewhere right in there. We want the base to be pretty bulky, somewhere right in there. And then I'll go ahead and select these right here in the middle and go ahead and scale that in like that, somewhere right in there. And now if I go to my solid mode, now we can actually check out and see how this is looking overall. And that's looking pretty good. So now we need to add in those details that live up here at the top. Go back into edit mode. And what we're going to do is add in 2 more loop cuts. So loop cut, click and drag all the way up. Do one right there. That's going to be the base of that little groove detail right there. And then do another one that's going to be right in here. I'm going to go back into my scale mode, hit 1 to go in my verts, select these at the top, keyframe selected to get in there. And what we want to do is just go back into wireframe mode and go ahead and select these and go ahead and scale these in like this. So the groove detail is essentially going to be welded out down there. It's going to start small and then get big. And after we scale that in, we'll go ahead and just select the center ones right here. So keyframe selected to get in there, so a little bit closer, and then select those and then go ahead and move that up like this. So we want this to be flush as well. So I'm going to go back into my solid mode after we have those selected, and we want it to be somewhere right in here where you can see at the top right there. We want that to be a perfect triangle like that. And then go back into my wireframe mode, select these 2 right in the center, and do the same thing. Just get that as close as possible that we can to making that a triangle. Somewhere right in there. I'll go ahead and look at this in object mode, see how that's looking. That's looking pretty good. So now last steps are just going to be to add a bevel modifier. That's just going to make sure that the sword is going to hold its shape. We'll go ahead and add a modifier, add subdivision surface as well. Go into object mode to see what it's looking like. We'll just right click, shade smooth on that. And that's looking pretty good overall. So from here, you can see, okay, our edges over here are looking a little soft. So if we want to sharpen up any of the edges, all we have to do is go back into edit mode over here. I'm going to go ahead and collapse my bevel, my subdivision, go ahead and turn both of those off in edit mode. And then we'll go ahead and just add in a loop cut down here. So we can add in a loop cut on the edge right there, edge right here, just to make those sharper. And then we'll go ahead and do one for the groove as well. One right there, and then one right there. And then I'll go back into scale mode, go into object mode, check that out. And that's looking pretty good. And the last thing that we want to do before we wrap this up, if you're having this little issue down here where your tip looks a little black, all we need to do is jump in edit mode again, and then just add in another loop cut down here. And I'll just tighten that up, and so it's a little bit sharper. So subdivision modifier holds its form a little bit better. Great, and we'll start working on the textures and shaders next. So here's where we're headed. We're going to take our model and we're going to turn it into our texture and shaded version of this asset. And as we move forward, the first thing that we're going to need to do is talk about UVs and apply UVs to our model. This Twitter post is a great visual representation of how UVs work and why we need them. So we have our chocolate over here that's represented in our 3D mesh, and then we have the unwrapped version of that, which is going to be represented as our texture. And the UVs is basically a flattened version of that 3D object. You can think of, your 3D object as your mesh, and then your UVs are going to be a 2D version of your object. And they're basically the in-between stage before you can apply a texture to your material. So you can think of your mesh as your 3D object, and then your UVs as your 2D version of that object. And that's what gives us the ability to have this 3D object communicate with the 2D texture. This could be a JPEG, Targa, whatever it may be, and apply it to our 3D mesh. So this is what broken UVs look like. And this is what we're going to find with our model as well. Whenever we have like a scrambled UV, we get this kind of stuff where we get this weird stretching happening whenever we apply the texture and all of that. So let's go ahead and take a look at that now. So before we jump into Blender, we got this UV checkers. This is going to be located in the downloads below. We're going to be using this to apply as our test texture for our object. So to start, we're just going to set up a basic material. We're going to select our blade right here and then go down to our material tab and just set this up. If you don't see a material here, all you have to do is just I'm going to go ahead and click X, and then I'm just going to click New to start with a fresh material. If you already see material there, you can just stick with that one. I'm going to go ahead and go to Base Color and then assign a texture. This is the same exact thing that we did with our Minecraft scene. So I'm going to go to Image Texture, and then I'm going to navigate to my, after our Open button right here, I'm going to navigate to our texture, and then just apply UV-checkers.jpg to that. That'll be in the downloads below. So whenever we apply it, we don't see anything yet, right? Because we're currently in solid mode, and we talked a bit about this before. If we switch to rendered mode, we can now start to see this texture applied. But the problem with this is that we don't actually want to do a render calculation because it is pretty heavy. So what we're going to do is we're going to stay in solid mode, and we're going to choose these options down here. So if we come in here, you know, when we did our renders tab up here, we played with this before where we turned on our scene world and HDRIs and all that. But this dialog box changes for each mode we're on here. So I'm going to click here on solid mode and then go up here to these options, and it'll control, these are basically our viewport display options right here. So long story short, there's a lot of really good stuff in here. What we want to do now is just click this little texture icon right here, and that'll just make sure that we can see that in the viewport. So you can see now, okay, this is clearly broken. The checkered don't look like they're supposed to, right? I'm going to go to material here, and I'm just going to go ahead and rename this to be checkers. So our material is going to be called checkers. And then what we're going to do now is just assign this to the rest of the object. So I'm going to select my guard, hit material, click checkers, select this. I'm going to go ahead and Q frame selected, zoom in here, and then select our checkers material for that, and then continue that all the way up. And there we go. And now you can see, okay, now we got a wide range of results, right? This one's super stretched. That one's super stretched. This one's kind of looks okay. This one looks a little bit better. We have a lot of random stuff happening here, right? So why are some of these looking okay and why are not? Well, this was just a cylinder that we started with. And if we apply, or if we just add in some primitive shapes, I'm just going to go to add up here and mesh. We'll just go to cube, and then I'll go ahead and move this over, and then I'll go ahead and add mesh and then go to cylinder. So I'm going to also assign our checkers material to this, to that one, and then this one. So primitive shapes in Blender, whenever we go to add, mesh, create, they're going to come with some sort of UVs. And usually the problem isn't there until we start modifying these, right? So you can see our handle right here, we didn't do that much modifications, so it doesn't look too bad. Our guard though, we did a lot of modifications, so it looks pretty bad. Same thing with our blade here, and then our pommel up here too. We got all this stretching and stuff happening there. So this is what we want to do for the next couple of chapters, is learn how to just get this checkerboard texture to look correct before we can then move on to our textures and shaders. We're going to start working on that next. For me, the toughest part about learning 3D modeling when I first started was following along with the video. It was very easy to miss this button, very easy to miss that button, and before you know, you have to stop, rewind, and struggle to find just the next step to the process. This is a brutally exhausting process, which is why we at cgfasttrack.com built the step-by-step screenshot application, and we put it into every single one of our courses. This would have saved me so much time and frustration and makes it so much easier and enjoyable to learn 3D animation. After you're done watching the video here on YouTube, click the link in the description and follow along there. So our goal right now is to begin working on our sword UVs and to get our checkerboard shader to look like this. So everything's going to be nice and square and the numbers are all right. So to get started with our UVs, I'm going to go ahead and select my handle right here. And then what I'm going to do is go over to my UV editing tab right up here. And basically what we're going to find in here is that we get access to this UV view. And this is, any one of these tabs up here, these are basically just customized versions of the interface. So we could technically do all of these tasks in layout view, but some of these, specifically UV editing and shading that we're going to get into, are really nice presets that I use a lot. So I find myself using this UV editing tab a lot. So first off, whenever we jump over, we notice one thing. We're currently in edit mode, right? So it is automatically putting us into edit mode just by switching over here. So whatever we have selected, we're going to be automatically editing, right? So what do our UVs look like here? If we go to select, and we'll just do select all, or you can hit A on your keyboard. We will now see over here that we have our UVs, and they're a little bit hard to see. Basically, I'll give you guys a tour of what we're looking at. It's going to be a little bit easier though if we go ahead and just clear out this texture. So by default, it's just going to display whatever texture we have on the viewport. I'm going to go ahead and just exit out of this so we can just start from scratch. There we go. So now we can see, okay, whatever we had selected here is now going to display over here. If I deselect over here, we see nothing. If I do select all, we see, okay, there's our UV. So this is the 3D version of the object. This is the 2D version of the object. So very much like modeling, when we model around and do our extrusions, our bevels and all that, we have to do similar operations, but they're going to be in our UV view, both combination of 3D view and a UV view. So if I go just hit tab, just to get back in object mode, you'll see, okay, now they disappear. If I go into edit mode, there they are. Same thing if I go down here to my guard. If I hit select my guard, go to tab, and then A to select all, we see, okay, now we have our 2D version of that. And same thing with our blade. If I hit tab, hit A to select all, we'll see, okay, whatever we have selected here is going to display over here. And this is essentially why things look broken. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my display for our textures in this view as well. So why are we doing this twice? Whoops, I'm just going to hit texture there. Why are we doing this twice? All these viewport settings right here are going to be different in every single tab that we're in. So this is its own display, its own interface, and so is this as well. So whatever we do, we want to have this texture on over here as well, so we can see that. So a quick tour of how we're going to actually be editing this. We're not going to be using this menu right here like we were last time. And we're also not going to be using a lot of these menus up here. What we are going to be using is the UV tab right here. And if you can't see this, you know, things can get a little bit tight over here. I'm using middle mouse button. You can see me right here. Middle mouse button to scroll through here like this. So the menus that we're going to be spending a lot of time in are going to be this UV menu right here, and then this UV menu over here. Over here, this view select, these are going to be similar menus of what we have been working with. So we'll be getting in these two a little bit, but it's primarily going to be UV view or UV menu right here and UV menu right here. And then of course, you know, we have our display tools right here. Same thing right there. So move, rotation, scale, all those things are going to be very similar in both of these. So if I were to do something like this, where if I, you know, I'm editing my sword, for example, if I come in here and then I come over here and I just go to my selection tool up here and just click and drag and select, and I can just go to my move tool right here. You can see, okay, I can move around these UVs, and as I move them, you can see the texture is going to be moving as well, because we were moving the UVs around, therefore the texture is going to move as well, right? So that was a broad look at UVs, and in the next chapter, we're actually going to start fixing some of these UVs, starting with our handle. So our goal right now is to fix and adjust the UVs for our handle right here. And you can see here how they're nice and square. That's what we want to do. So to give myself some more work, I'm just going to go ahead and move this properties window all the way over right here, just to give myself some more room to work. And I'm going to go and select my handle right here, hit tab to go in edit mode, and then hit A to select all. So this one's a good one to start with because it started with a cylinder. The UVs aren't bad, they're just stretched. So how do we fix this stretching right here? Well, we can go over here to our UV view and actually fix them. So what we want to do up here is go ahead, while we have our move tool, or actually we'll go into our scale tool right here, and we'll just click and drag to select all these UVs. And now you can see, okay, we can move this around, we can scale this around. So what we want to do right now is scale the UVs, specifically right here. And what you'll see, okay, now we have actually control to make these UVs square, right? So we want this square right here to be as square as possible. We'll just go ahead and adjust our scale like this. And some controls when you're working in here, these are going to be very, very similar to our viewport. Middle click, shift middle click over to move around and pan around, and then middle mouse to scroll in and out. So you can see my hotkeys down here. If I just do shift middle click, or just middle click for that matter, and then middle mouse scroll in and out. So I'll go ahead and make those as square as possible. Somewhere right in there. That's looking pretty good. Great. And then we'll go ahead and now we'll do the base of the handle up here. So this is technically going to be part of the pommel. But we'll go ahead and jump out of edit mode here. We'll go to object mode, and then we'll switch over to our pommel up here, and we'll select that and then hit tab to go into edit mode. Now this one's going to be a little bit different. If we hit select A to select all, we'll see that, okay, now we have three different objects. We got this one, we we got this one, and we got this one. What's going on here? So this is because we had a torus, a cylinder, and another torus. So what we want to do is go over here and we want to fix this. So hit A over here to select all, or just select, or just go to select and then select all. And then we'll do the same thing over here. We'll go to select all, or just hit A. So now what we want to do is we just want to spread these out. So if we go to UVs and then we go to UV pack islands. So what is pack islands? Just to see what happens after we hit this button. You'll see now, after we hit that UV pack islands, it takes all those different islands. Also, islands are basically these things. Anytime an object doesn't touch another object in UV space, it's not technically connected. Those are going to be the islands. So because these are 3 different objects, technically we have 3 different islands. So that's just going to flatten that out. Now what we have the ability to do is to scale these just like we did before. So while I have my scale tool here, if I just deselect nothing, I can select this and then I'll go to select linked, and then we'll do linked. And that's just going to make sure that we have all that selected. And we can see here, okay, while we have this selected, now what we can do is just scale this around. And after you scale a couple times, you'll see, okay, what am I looking at right here? And you can actually see down here, as I scale this around, it's this bottom one right here. So what we want to do here is just scale that to make sure that those are going to be square. So you might have to do a little bit of guessing to see which ones they're going to be. So you notice as I stretch this one out, stretch this one in, those are looking much better. There we go. So those are going to be square now. And now we're going to do the same thing with the top one right here. So select this. So click and drag. Whoops. I'll click and drag. Select linked, and then linked. That's going to select everything, and we'll do the same thing here. We'll just squash this in, stretch this out like that, focusing on making this up here square. That's looking pretty good. I'm not going to be too overly concerned with the overlap in here. I'm just going to select this right here. Just like that, those first on there. We'll do select and then select linked. There we go. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing. I'll go ahead and stretch this out to be square, something like that. So now that all of them are looking square, what we want to do is repack these. So if we just hit A to select all, then we'll go to UV, pack islands. And now you see here, okay, now we're getting something a little bit better. Specifically now things are going to be not overlapping, right? But something's up. The scale is off. You can see these checkerboards are going to be bigger than these checkerboards right there. So what we want to do is UV, and underneath pack islands, we'll do average island scale. And that button isn't perfect all the times, but sometimes, I would say bulk of the time, it does a pretty good job. So from here, we'll just go ahead and then do UV pack islands again to repack that. So now we can see, okay, this square right here and that square right there are looking a lot closer. Okay, so we have 2 objects done. So we'll start moving on to the guard next. So with the guard, we have an interesting problem, and that's the fact that it's currently set up to have the mirror modifier. So you can see here, the 6 right here looks correct, but over here it looks backwards. So that's a problem. So what we have to actually do here, if we go into edit mode, you'll see, okay, we only have half an object, right? So if it's being mirrored, the UVs are going to be mirrored as well, right? So what we have to do is we have to collapse our modifiers. So what does that mean? So I'm going to go to my modifier tab over here. I'm going to go ahead and give myself some more room. So I got my modifiers tab right here. And I got my mirror modifier up here. This is a procedural action, which means it's happening on top of our mesh, right? So this is our original mesh. And then basically in edit mode, we only have access to half of it because in object mode, the mirror modifier is being applied. So we never have access to this mirror while we're in edit mode. This because it's being performed on top of this, right? So what we have to do here is collapse this. So while we're in object mode up here, we have to go up this little dialog box up here with our mirror and hit apply. If you're in edit mode, you will not be able to do this. You can't apply modifiers while you're in edit mode. So we have to go to object mode and then apply. What that's going to do is basically get rid of that, but it's going to collapse it into edit mode. So now the actual mesh is not mirrored anymore. It's just a full mesh. And if I go into edit mode, we'll be able to see that a little bit better. So now we have 2 halves here, right? So that's what we're after. So I'm going to go ahead and give myself some more room, expand all of that by clicking and dragging. Great. And then now we want to apply some UVs. So this one's a little bit more difficult, because our UVs are basically destroyed. And this happened because we started with a cylinder, then we extruded those out. And basically from there on, there's going to be no working UVs left, right? So we're going to have to create these from scratch. So we're going to just barely touch the surface of this UV menu here. It's just enough information for us to get started. So our goal right now isn't to make the most perfect UVs. That's not what we're doing here. Our goal is just simply to make our first model, right? So there's a lot of really good tools, specifically that we go over in Blender UV fundamentals. But for now, we're just going to stick with Smart UV Project. And Smart UV Project is just basically an automatic way to use UVs. For very, very simple things, it can be okay. For more complicated things, you have to kind of get into the rest of these tools. So what we're going to do is hit Smart UV Project. And what we'll do is, just all these default values, we don't really know what these do yet, so we'll just hit OK. And there we go. Right off the bat, we get a pretty decent solution. The squares are looking square. The numbers are going the right way. They're going the wrong direction here, but generally speaking, that's okay. So for this one, this is going to work totally fine. So what we're going to do now is go into object mode and then go over to our blade here. And I'm going to just select that in object mode, hit tab, and then select A for everything, or just go up to select all. Select all up here. And then what we're going to do is UV, Smart UV Project. And we're going to see something interesting happen here. I'm going to just do default values again, and we'll talk about these as we go. Hit OK, and there we go. And now we'll see it didn't quite turn out right. What is happening here? There's a couple different things that are happening. First off, we need to address the stretching problem. You can see here that this does not look like the right shape of this, right? So what is happening here, right? If we go to our guard, so I'll go into object mode up here. I'm going to select my guard, go into edit mode. We'll see, okay, these shapes, generally speaking, look like the right shapes. They look like the shapes that we have here. So this shape right here is generally speaking matching this shape right here. So what's happening here? Well, we talked a bit about this earlier, but if I go into my object transforms over here, go into my object properties, we'll see that our pesky scale is not 1 and 1 and 1. And we talked a bit about this with our apply scale. So if I go to object, apply, and then apply scale, what that's going to do is make sure all these scale values are 1 and not those weird arbitrary values that we set before. Why is that important? Well, whenever we do our UV operations in edit mode, along with really any modeling operation, this scale value is happening after all this is applied. So what that means is this is all going to be stretched because we were stretching it over here, right? So Blender thought this was just a cube, and it wasn't a cube. It was more of like a rectangle, basically. So now what we can do is just simply UV and then Smart UV Project. And we'll just hit OK. And now we'll see, okay, it's looking better, but it still feels stretched. What's going on here? Well, let's go ahead and we'll just do UV, Smart UV Project. We have a couple different options here. We have correct aspect ratio and stretch to UV balance right here. What we want to do is uncheck this stretch to UV balance. What that is doing is forcing this thing to take up this entire square, which we don't want, right? We want this checkerboard to be square. So I'll uncheck that, hit OK, and there we go. So now you can see this shape and this shape are relatively the same, right? And you can see these are now squares, which is what we're after. Now, this is something we'll talk about in a later course, but basically we have all this negative space over here, which isn't the best thing. Basically, long story short, if you have like a 4K texture or whatever, there's a lot of empty space here. And generally speaking, you want to utilize that. For what we're doing right now, this is totally fine for what we're doing. We're just going to leave it here. Great. So now we have almost all the way done. And then the last one we want to do is right up here with our polymer. We'll do that next. So now we need to fix our polymer up here. We're going to fix this object right there, and it's going to be our last object. So if I go into edit mode, you'll see here, okay, we have our mirror again. So we want to collapse that. I'll go to my modifier here, go to my mirror, and then go to apply and make sure I'm in object mode here, and then just hit apply. And there we go. Now we're going to go to edit mode. There we go. We have our collapsed mirror modifier. So you can see here, we're getting some stretching already. So we want to make sure that we apply our scale. So we'll go to object mode again. So I'm going to make myself some more room here so we can see. So I'm in object mode, object, and then apply scale. Great. And then now what I'm going to do is go into edit mode again. I'm going to select everything by hitting A and then just go up to UV and then Smart UV Project. And we're going to see we have a couple different problems with this one. I'm just going to use the values that we have been, hit OK. And now you can see, okay, this is looking okay. But as soon as I go into object mode again, we'll see we have a lot of different stretching happening here. We're getting this stuff happening here, this stuff happening here. What is this? Well, if we go to our modifier stack here, we have our subdivision modifier. And if you notice, we have an edit mode is turned off, which means we cannot see what the subdivision modifier is doing in edit mode. So that's why it's looking different in edit mode versus object mode, right? So long story short, our cage mesh here is essentially collapsing in on itself. The way we modeled this isn't perfect. And the way what's happening here is essentially this is moving upwards here. This is moving downwards here. Long story short, there's some modeling techniques that we could potentially add in here that would solve this, specifically adding some more holding edges, which would prevent it from collapsing on itself. But as a quick solution, what we can do here is simply collapse this modifier as well. So we don't want to do the whole thing. We just want to do one subdivision. So I'll set this to 1. And the levels of viewport, I'll go to my tab object and then hit apply. So why am I setting this to 1? Basically, you can see here how this looks a little bit more polygonal right there. If I go to 2, you can see it's getting smooth more. We don't necessarily need that. Just 1 will do for now, because what we want is simply for this cage mesh to hold its form a little bit more. So we'll go ahead and apply this while we're in object mode up here. So we'll do apply. And now what we can do, so we're in edit mode here. We can see that we have that. While we're in object mode, I'm going to go ahead and do add modifier, then do subdivision surface. And then what this is going to do is now apply that second level of subdivision. So our cage mesh is now holding its form a little bit better, and we can still subdivide this a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this off in edit mode, and then go into edit mode again. And then what we can do here is now I'm going to go ahead and move this over to give myself some more room. Give myself some more room again. And then what we can do here is just UV Smart UV Project, and then hit OK. And there we go. So now we can see, okay, now we have some problems here. All this stuff is happening. This doesn't look too great. What's happening here? Well, the Smart UV Project is not perfect, not by a long shot. And if we go in here, we have some other options to get some pretty quick and automatic UVs. So Smart UV Project should be your go-to whenever you're not making custom UVs. But a cube projection is another really good one to do, which is really just like an automatic projection. Again, these are really automated solutions. These are not, custom UVs, which is really important to get into when you cut and all that. We're going to keep things super simple for now. So we'll just do cube projection. And what you'll see here is, okay, over here, it just dumped everything on top of each other. But if we look over here, these are all looking pretty good. Not too bad, right? Certainly better than what we had before. So now what we need to do is fix this over here so that this isn't sitting on top of itself and they're all laid out nice and clean. The reason why we do that, basically we don't want the same textures sitting on top of each other. That's going to be important when we get into shading. So what we do over here is just select everything and then go to UV, and then we'll just do pack island skin. So anything that isn't connected, it's just going to lay out flat, just like that. And now we have that. And we'll wrap it up right there. So that's looking pretty good. Again, is this perfect UVs? Definitely not. It's just our first asset. We're keeping things very simple just so we can get the bigger picture workflow down. And now in the next chapter, we'll go ahead and start looking at the shader editor and start applying textures and shaders. So here's where we're headed. We're going to take our UV'd model and we're going to apply these textures and shaders. So before we jump into the original scene, this is the final result that I have here. So I just want to break down what we're going to be working on. So you can see here, we got like this grungy metallic shader. We have this rune effect here. We have this rune effect there. We got this different handle material. That's all the stuff that we're going to be focused on now. So to get started, we're going to take a look at the shading view tab right over here. So shading tab, what is shading tab? So before we move any further, what I'm going to do is just select my cylinder over here, select my cube, hit X, and then delete. And then what I'm going to do is zoom in here and cube frame selected on my guard here. And then we're just going to look at this right here. And we're just going to talk about what we're looking at here. So this right here is what we call our shading network. That is what the shading tab is referring to right here. Again, this is a custom display that we have here all set up for this. We have our viewport right here. The only thing different about this is that we're in this material preview mode. So material preview mode is similar to like solid mode, right? We have rendered mode. The only difference is it's like an in-between. It's not going to be our final render. It's not going to be our preview, but it's going to be a way for us to see our materials and our shaders and our textures in a quick and efficient way. So you can see we have our HDRI set up. So we talked a bit about those before. Really useful. And it just gives us a way to very clearly see our object. We got our object menu up here. All that's going to be the same. We have our properties over here, outliner, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then over here, we have two different things. This is going to be just a quick way for us to display our textures, which we're not going to really use here. I do use this, but we're going to skip over for now. And this is going to be our texture view as well. We're going to skip over this one as well. And we're just going to mainly focus on this right here and this right here. But before we get into here, let's explain what we're looking at right here. So this is checkers right here, right? So we know what this is before. If we come down here to our material tab, we notice we have checkers right there. So that is the checkers material that we made before. And now we're seeing it over here, right? So this network right here is a node-based way to do exactly what we're doing down here in our material tab, right? So back when we were adding in our textures, when we, added in the UV checkers.jpg, whenever we, adjusted our Minecraft textures, this is all of that in a node-based form. So what is node-based? Basically what that means is instead of, working in this stacked view, we're going to work in this node view, which is basically these things right here. And you can see how they're all networked together, which we're going to talk about. So let's break down what we're seeing here in our shading view, in our shading node graph right here. So these are nodes, and nodes, if you've never worked with them before, they're a completely different world. So you have layer-based applications like Photoshop, and then we have our 3D viewport, which is basically a bunch of nodes that are actually just displayed in 3D form. And down here, we have our shading view, which is comprised of nodes. So you can think of this down here as kind of working in Photoshop, but it's no longer layers, but it's going to be networks of things. So we have our UV checkers.jpg, our principled BSDF, and our material output. What are these things? So this is our texture, this is our shader, and this is our material. What's the difference between these things? So when we built Minecraft, we talked about materials, we talked about textures, we talked about how we can assign a texture to a material, and that's going to give us our Minecraft. We can see all that. But we haven't really talked about this thing called a shader before. So textures are basically going to be, that 2D image that we assign to our material. But our shader is actually how we control the properties like specularity. Is it metallic? Is it going to be, a flat, more dusty type of material? Those are what shaders are going to do. And when we combine them, that's going to make up our material. So we have our texture right here, we have our shader right here, and then our material output, you can really think of a material as the container itself. It's everything together. It's not just the shader, it's not just the textures, it's all of it together. The network itself makes the material. All right, so in the next chapter, we're going to talk about how to actually manipulate this stuff. So step one of getting our materials is to go from a flat shader to adding in our grunge maps and our metallic and all those properties. And then we're going to add in the runes last. So to start, we're going to focus on the blade and we're going to create our first shader network. So after clicking new on a new shader, we get this principled BSDF. What is this principled BSDF? I'm going to expand this so we can see this a little bit more. So the main properties that we're going to want to get to know are things like base color, which is going to change the actual color. For now, since we're going to be using all the controls over here, we don't actually need the properties panel anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over like this, just to get rid of that, just to give us more space. So we have base color, we're just going to control that. We have things like metallic, which is going to be another really important one. So as I click and drag this right here, we see, okay, now we're seeing some big changes up here. If I rotate around, we might not see much, but if we start playing around with the roughness now, say if I go down on the roughness, something pretty low, we can see, okay, now we have a metallic material, right? It feels like metal. And since we have our roughness low now, what I can do is go down on the metallic. You can see, okay, this feels more diffused, something more closer to plastic. All the way up feels closer to metal, right? So roughness is the other really, really big important one. This is going to be basically the blurriness of the reflections, which we're going to be using a lot. And then down here, all the way, we have emission, which is basically if we click this, go into our color wheel here and go up on the value right here, we can have, is this glowing or is it not? So that's how we make a glow material. So there's a lot of other really important ones. Specifically, next up would be bump. We're not going to be using a bump at all in this shader network. So we're just going to focus on those ones to get started. Now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in up here just so we can see this a little bit better. And the first thing you want to do is implement a grunge map. And a grunge map is going to help the metallic feel like it's worn down. So all these textures that we're going to be using are going to be located in the downloads below under sword textures. So what I'm going to do is just copy this path, download those, copy this path wherever you have it on your computer. And what we're going to do is simply go to add, and then we're going to go to texture, and then we're going to go to image texture right there. And that's going to be the same image texture that we've been working with our Minecraft, with our checkered, all of that. I'm going to click that, and then we're going to have our attached to our cursor, and then we're going to click down just like that to drop it. I'm going to go ahead and open, and then I'm going to go and find my textures. And then what I'm going to do is grab my scratches right here. And our scratch map is just going to look like this right here. Just a bunch of scratched metal surfaces. So I'm going to scratches.jpg, I'm going to hit open, and there we go. So now what I'm going to do here is just drag and drop the color into the roughness. Why am I doing it on the roughness? Because we want to break up the reflection. We want to break that up so it feels, so it's not so clean, right? But we have a problem right here. We have these scratches and everything, but it doesn't feel as broken up as it should be, right? So if I come down here to my color space and switch this over to non-color, we're going to see this magical thing happen, which is all of a sudden, this thing feels much, much more believable. We see all these details, what's going on here. So by default, this color space is set to sRGB, and we switched over to non-color. Why? Basically, long story short, there's a really long, complicated explanation on color spaces and all that. The reason for this that I'm going to give you right now is just simply whenever we have a color here, and if it goes into base color, we just want to leave these to be default sRGB. And whenever we have a color going into anything else, we want to switch this over to non-color. Again, there's a super complicated reason I'm going to skip over on why that is. But long story short, non-color for non-color slots, and then for color up here, if you're putting that into base color, then you want to stick it on sRGB. So this is looking pretty good. We have a couple more nodes that we want to get to. Specifically, if we want to scale these scratches up and down, that's going to be called tiling. So we're going to be calling this tiling or texture. The nodes we need this for our mapping. So we're going to go to add, we're going to go to vector, and then we're going to come down here to mapping. So what is this mapping node? Basically what this does is I'm going to plug this vector into vector. What this does is basically controls how many times we're going to see this. But you notice as soon as we plug that in, it becomes broken. It becomes very, we don't see our texture anymore. This is because the mapping node needs to communicate with our UVs, the same UVs we were working with in our UV editing tab. So what we need to do here is go to add, we'll go to input, and then we'll go to UV map. We'll go ahead and click this down, and we'll drag and drop UVs into vector. So now we got our network all hooked up. So let's break down what we're seeing here. So basically the way it's working is we have an input from our UVs. So basically our object right here is being sent into our network right here to bring in, to basically import our UVs. And then that's going to go through our mapping, and our mapping is going to control how big these, how essentially scale the UVs are. So if we do something like this, or we do something like 2 and 2, down here into scale, you can see it becomes smaller, right? And then we have that controlling our texture, and then we have that going into our principled BSDF, which is our shader, which is going to control things like reflectivity and whatnot. And then we're setting that into our material output. And that's going to be our very first shader network. So in the next chapter, we'll start customizing this for the rest of our shaders. So we're going to start duplicating our blade shader, and we're going to make the guard and the handle and the pommel shaders. So I'm going to go ahead and select my guard up here. And then what I'm going to do here is assign the blade shader to this. I'm not going to manipulate this at all though, because I'm going to duplicate this now. So I'm going to hit that little duplication button right here. And then you notice our text right here says blade.001. That's how we know it's been duplicated. So I'm just going to change this over to guard. And then all we have to do here is simply change the base color. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this color right here. I'm going to make this something like a deeper brown. And then I'm just going to control the saturation a little bit and then darken that value. So these are going to be the final results. We'll have those in the screenshots. And then from here, you'll see, okay, our scale is going to be off, right? The scratches on here are going to be much smaller than what we have here. So let's go ahead and adjust those. If we go over to our mapping over here, if we set this to something like 0.5 and 0.5, so that's, X, Y for the texture, all of a sudden, then it becomes smaller, and that's going to be much, much more believable. So we'll go ahead and assign this same shader to these up here. So we'll go ahead and select our pommel. Select our shader rate, our material assignment right here, and we'll choose guard. And then we'll do the same thing for the tip of the pommel. So we'll go ahead and select that, select guard. And there we go. Now we need to adjust this for our handle. So we're going to select that, and we'll go ahead and select our blade for that again. And then what we'll do is go ahead and duplicate this again. And then we'll just go ahead and call this handle. So there's a couple of different properties that we want to adjust here. Currently, this is metallic. We don't really want this. We want this to be some sort of, material that you can grip. You can think of this as rubber. Maybe it's going to be fabric. Because, we're not going to get that specific with this. We can get kind of creative with it. So for example, if I just want to come in here and take my metallic and turn it all the way down, so now it's going to be a little bit more diffused. If I come in here with my base color, tone this down, make it something like black, it's currently going to be way too sharp. This is that scratch map going into roughness. And we're going to switch this over to this lead plate.tiff. And this is a really good map that I use just for like greasy stuff, things that, fingerprints are going to be on, all of that good stuff. So I'm just going to go in here and we'll now just swap out the scratches.jpg right here. And we can do this just by simply jumping into the file, open in image button right here. So we can click that. We can go ahead and paste that in here. I'm going to go in and choose my lead plate.tiff, hit open image. And immediately you'll start to see, okay, we're better, but it's still too clear. This color space automatically gets switched over to sRGB. So we need to switch this over to non-color. And then you'll see, okay, now this is looking more like what we want, which is going to be a bit more diffused, a bit more believable. And then from here, what we can do is control the specularity. So the specular slide is going to control how reflective it is. Not in the sense that is it metallic or not, but like if it's a plastic or if it's a rubber, whatever it may be, this is going to be how reflective it is. So I'm going to make it a bit lower, somewhere around 0.25 right there. And there we go. That's looking pretty good. And then in the next chapters, we're going to start implementing the glowing runes onto our sword. So here's where we're going to start working on the rune glowing setup. So we're going to jump into our blade here. We're just going to work on the initial node setup. So we're going to need this setup right here. We're going to need a texture, a mapping, and UV map. So instead of building this stuff from scratch, what I'm going to do is just select this and then Control-C to copy and then Control-V to paste. Now, after you paste, you won't see anything. We have to click and drag down because it's going to paste on top of each other. Okay, so now we have that texture set up all ready to go for us. And what we're going to do is bring in the rune stencil. So I'll go to my file dialog, and then I'll go to my downloads, my sword textures, and then I'll go to my runes.jpg. So first off, let's go ahead and take a look at our texture here. So our rune texture is going to look like this right here. It's just a rune text that's going in this rectangular format. So it's not a square texture here, and we'll run into a little bit of an issue coming up. So what I'm going to do here is just go ahead and plug this into emission. Emission is where things glow. And immediately we're going to see this, right? It's this weird stretchy thing. So why is this happening? This is happening because our aspect ratio here for our runes here is not 1:1, right? It's this really long rectangular shape. Normally I would have, this just on a texture. We're going to keep things simple. Just use this as it is. And what we need to do here is now stretch this mapping out to compensate for that. And what we want to do here with this scale right here is have this be somewhere around an 8:1 aspect ratio. So we'll do size in X, 8, and then we'll do 1 and Y. And then what we need to do is rotate this because currently it's going vertically, which we do not want. We want this to go horizontally. So we'll switch this over to 90 degrees in our Z axis. And there you go. Now we're starting to see stuff happen, right? So it's not enough. The size isn't right. So what we have to do is go up on the scale here. And what I'm going to do is simply just go something like 80 and 10 right here. And then you see, okay, now this size is something that we'd expect, but it still doesn't feel glowing, right? So we have two things that we want to do. We want to make this texture brighter. So I'm going to move this over. And we're going to do that by hue saturation value. Now, so I'm going to go to add, color, and then hue saturation. Now it doesn't say value here, but if we click in here and then we'll just click and drop onto our network right there, we'll see that we have a classic hue saturation value node right here. And if you're used to Photoshop, it's the same exact thing. Now, what we want out of this is the value. Value is brightness. So if I do something like 100 here, you notice that our runes get brighter, right? But something missing, right? We don't have that glow effect. So this is where we go into our Eevee settings here. So I'm going to go to my properties over here, go up to my Eevee dialog up here. And then, this is where we were messing with like ambient occlusion. Again, Eevee is going to be the renderer that we're using right here. It's what's calculating the reflections and all of that. We used ambient occlusion before, right? That was with our Minecraft. And what we're going to do now is use bloom. And you can see all of a sudden we have a nice glow setup. And if we go down on this value, something like 50, 25, now you can see, okay, now this feels a lot more believable. There we go. I'll go ahead and move this back over, close the properties up a little bit. And then our last thing here is going to be to colorize this. So what we're going to do is add an add. We'll go to color and we'll do the mix RGB. And then again, we'll go ahead and drag and drop this over our network right here, just like that. And there we go. Now what we want to do here is colorize this. And we're going to set the blending mode. So if you're used to Photoshop, for example, this is blending modes, just like Photoshop. And what we want to do is set this to multiply. Why are we setting it to multiply? Basically what that's going to do is allow us to use this color right here to colorize it. We're not seeing much yet, but if we go ahead and move this factor all the way up like this is basically how much is this going to be colorizing this, right? So we do multiply, factor all the way up, and then we'll do something like a deep orange color right here. And this is where we can, since we're kind of darkening it with this colorization, what we can do is now go really high on this value, something like 500 right there. And that's it. And now what we have to do is actually get this to be in the center of our groove right here. So this is going to be our final node network for this one right there. And then we're going to start working on the assignment for the middle groove next. So now we want to get the runes to actually be in the middle of this groove right here. So the first thing we have to do is set up our assignment. And what we're going to do here is, instead of having this be over the entire blade, what I'm going to do here is now disconnect this emission, right? And what we need to do here is now do a polygon assignment. So I'm going to go to my material setup here, and there's going to be something new. We haven't actually done this yet. So far, our object assignments, which we've been doing right here. So this is how we, switch out if we want the checkers or if we want the blade. That's how we switch out assignments, right? So now what we need to do is set up assignments on individual polygons themselves. So the way we do that, I'm going to go into edit mode here. I'm going to go into my face selection, or by hitting 3. And what I'm going to do here is select these polygons right here. So it should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 of those. And if I back out you here, you'll see that, okay, it's just this right here. Just these top ones right here. So I'm going to go ahead and frame that so I can rotate around this a little bit better. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the back. So I'll do shift click, select all of those, and then those edges as well. And there we go. So now what we need to do is make an assignment based off of this selection. What we're going to do over here is come over to our material slots. So this list that we see here, what is this thing? Well, basically what we can do is, this is what's assigned to the object. And And if we do this little plus, we have the ability to assign something new to the object. If I were just to do new right here, currently it's not going to be assigned to anything. I'm going to go ahead and undo out of that. Hit this little plus icon right here. And what I'm going to do here is now hit assign right here. And what that's going to do is assign this slot to these polygons. So this one's going to be assigned to the based object, and this one's going to be assigned just to these polygons. And you can see now it's a different color, right? So now what we need to do is assign that same blade to this. So we have a blade right here. We have our new assignment right here, and we're going to select blade. But we just didn't do anything because we have blade selected here, blade selected there. But now what we can do is duplicate this material. I'm going to hit the duplicate button while I'm on this slot right here, duplicate, and then you notice we get our name change right there. And I'm going to go ahead and underscore glow, rename it to underscore glow. And now what I can do is simply connect this emission. So now what's happening here is we have our blade shader right here that's not connected, and we have our blade glow shader right here that is connected. It's the same exact material setup, just two different shaders now. One's connected, one isn't. Now it's still not going to be lined up like we want, so we have to go back over here to our tiling right here. And this part, this can be a little bit tricky. And again, these exact settings that I'm using here might not be exactly what you have, because whenever we do the UV projection, it's based off the model, and your models might be slightly different. We did start with like those exact values, but things can change over time, right? So I'm going to show you how to line this up, and your settings might be a little bit different. So what we need to do here is click and drag here, and we can just click on a parameter and drag like this to move it. The problem right now is that it's moving too fast. So if we just simply do Alt Shift, click and drag, we'll see, okay, now we can incrementally move this, which is going to be a little bit more manageable. I don't know if we can do the Y as well, so then we can move that over like that. So my value is going to be somewhere around, negative 0.5. Yours might be different. That all depends. And then one note I just want to make right now is that if we go to the back's not going to be lined up exactly, because this value works for over here, but it doesn't work over here. I'm going to skip over that part because the way we're going to present this is only going to be in the front. And realistically, I think it's a good thing for you guys to see this early on, is that, if we're not going to see the back of it, we don't need to worry about it, right? And the entire cinematic was just rendered from the front side. Now, if you do want to adjust the back, all you have to do is make a new assignment for the back, do the same workflow, duplicate the shader, and then just make new settings. So you end up having 3 different shaders. You have one for the metallic, one for the glow, and one for the back. So we're going to skip over that part. And we're going to start doing the Palmel assignment up here to make this glow right there. So now we're going to work on our Palmel setup and make that part glow as well. So very similar workflow that we just did. I'm going to go ahead and go back to object mode. I'm going to select my Palmel, and then I'm going to go into my shader slot over here. Go ahead and hit plus. And what I'm going to do is go into edit mode. And then what I'm going to do here is just simply go into face selection and select these faces right here. So I'll do shift selection to select all of that. And then a cool workflow that we can do to select the rest of them is simply grow this. So if we go select, we'll go to more or less, and then we'll just do more on this. And I'm going to use the hotkey Control Number Pad plus for this. So Control Number Pad plus. And you can always see hotkeys here too. So if I do select more or less, you'll see we have the hotkey listed right there. Great. And then what I'm going to do here is just simply hit, go to my second slot here, hit assign, and there we go. And then I'm just going to go ahead and assign blade glow. Now, very similar to what we talked about before, the tiling is not right here. So what we have to do is duplicate this shader. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this little duplicate shader icon. Our new shader will be called, blade glow.001. And I'm going to go ahead and change this to Palmel _ glow. And now all we need to do is adjust these tiling settings right here to get this to line up. And the scale values that I found that worked best for this one was just 4 and then 0.25. Again, that's mostly from experimentation. Again, for you, if you want to do this from scratch, what you would do is simply just do Alt, Shift, click, and then scale this like this until you get something that you feel is right. And then from here, after we set up those 4 and 0.25, all we do is just adjust right here. So then we have Alt Shift click right here to click and move that around. And then we'll do this one as well. And you can see the X is going to be a little bit trickier. I find myself, coming in here and I'll just do like incremental values. I'll just do like 0.0, 0.01 and then move it that way. It's a little tedious. Again, there's better ways to do this. Basically how I would normally do this would be to just go into Photoshop and line it up. But we're going to just keep it very simple and very Blender centric for this one. And there we go. Now we have that assigned right there. Now, if we wanted to do the back as well, we could do that as well. So I'll go to the back here and I'll do a selection here. I'll do select all the way around. And then I'll simply grow that selection again. So select more or less more. And I'll use the Control Numberpad plus hotkey to do this again a couple times. And I'll simply go to my blade glow right here. And then I'll do my assignment right there. And then what I'm going to do is make sure I rename that. Looks like it didn't actually get renamed before. So I'll do Polymetal Glow. And there we go. And again, if we wanted to have this aligned perfectly, what I would do there is just simply do a new assignment, duplicate the shader, and do that again. Since we're only going to be presenting it from the front, I'm just going to worry about making the front look good. Right now, if you render your sword, it's going to look something like this, which is why in part 3, we're going to go over cinematic rendering techniques and build out the environment to our scene. Be sure to show us your work with hashtag CGFastTrack, and now it's time to build out our environment.